Next one, if you speak too quickly or slowly, you will lose marks. True or false? What could happen if you speak too quickly or slowly during the test? True, both can affect fluency, and quick speech can affect your pronunciation. So if you speak slowly, it would mean that your fluency mark will be band 5. It is better to use simple, commonly used vocabulary rather than lots of complex words. Is that true or false? Okay, anything's true? Anybody else? Chang thinks false. True. Answer true. Only higher level candidates should attempt more advanced vocabulary. The point is to make yourself understood on the speaking test. And if you try and use lots of complex vocabulary, you could have problems with coherence. So the number one rule of an IELTS speaking test is to make sure the examiner understands you. Next, number 8, the examiner would challenge your opinion. So the examiner might say, I disagree with you. Is that true or false? Some falses. It is true. The examiner may do this as part of the discussion. In fact, the examiner should do this as part of the discussion. An experienced examiner will definitely do it. Number 9, the examiner will clarify part 3 question if the candidate does not understand it. In other words, if you say, can you explain what this word means? Will the examiner explain the meaning of it? Is that true or false? It's true or false? In part 3 speaking, it is true. The examiner will do this. They are expected to adjust part 3 questions to appropriate difficulty of vocabulary for the candidate. So they will do it in part 3. They cannot explain a word in part 1, but they can in part 3. Last one. Questions on holidays are usually the easiest for candidates. True or false? What do you think? So Ling thinks false. Anybody else? And the answer is most false. Most candidates answer holiday questions really badly. That's because a lot of them are not, don't have a lot of experience to traveling to many different places. All right, let's have a look at some part 3 speaking. And firstly, let's look at common question types in part 3 speaking. So here we are. Here are 3 common question types that the examiner could ask you. So compare and contrast, give an opinion, and imagine, or sometimes called speculation. So here are some examples. If the topic is cities, that the examiner might ask. So, how is life different in cities compared to rural areas? Comparison question. How do you think life in big cities could be made easier? An opinion question. And what do you think cities will be like in 50 years' time? So an imagination question or speculation question about the future. And those 3 types of questions happen time and time again in part 3. So look at some more examples. So let's have a look at the first one, which is comparison and an answer to that question. So firstly, the cost of living in cities is much higher. Housing is much more expensive in cities compared to rural areas. Everything costs more. I think life in cities is more difficult. There are more people, so there's more competition for jobs. Life is a lot slower in rural areas. Everyone knows each other and there's a sense of community. I don't think rural areas experience the social problems that you find in cities like crime and homelessness. So an opinion answer, in my opinion, cities need to be well planned. Public transport can definitely make life easier because there are so many people and it can be really stressful just to move around. Public areas like parks are also important because people need space to relax, and I think cities should be made into healthier places to live and work. And the third one, about the future, I imagine cities will be less polluted because we'll have electric cars and better public transport. More people might work from home, so maybe cities won't be so busy. But I think there will probably still be problems because more and more people are migrating to cities. So I'm not so optimistic about issues like crime, homelessness, and unemployment. All right, so how to use examples. So in part 3 of the speaking test, you should try to give longer, more detailed answers. A great way to do this is by giving an example. However, I've noticed that students often forget to give an example, even when I've told them to answer using the 3 steps. So the 3 steps to answer a question, which is a direct answer, answer the question, explain your answer, and then give an example. So one solution to this problem when answering in part 3 is to force yourself to say the words for example. When I force my students to say these words, they always manage to find an example, and the result is that they always give better answers. So try it, just force yourself to say the words for example and see what happens. In part 3 of IELTS speaking, it really helps if you give personal examples. So let's look at this question. Do you think it's important for people to have hobbies? Yes, I think people need to have hobbies because we all need to do things we enjoy in our spare time. In my case, I find that playing football once a week with some friends helps me to relax, keep fit, and forget about work. I think it's the same for everyone. Another question, can hobbies have any negative effects? Yes, if you spend too much time on your hobby, it can affect other parts of your life. I remember that one of my friends spent most of his time at university playing computer games instead of studying, and in the end he failed most of his exams. So, simple examples from personal experience. What about grammar? Okay, so when answering the two questions below, you should be aware that the examiner is expected to hear some different verb tenses. So if you answer a question using the same verb or grammar tense, it is regarded as simple grammar. The examiner wants you to vary it. So let's have a look at this question. Do you think films have changed since you were a child? So if you look at the question, we have past perfect and past simple. And the answer, no, I don't think films have changed much since I was a child. When I was younger, I enjoyed watching action films. And the Hollywood formula for this type of film seems to be the same today. For example, I like the original Superman films, and superheroes are still a popular subject for filmmakers. So in that answer there, we have three different grammar tenses. Another example. As the technology for home viewing improves, do you think people will stop going to the cinema in future? No, I don't think people will stop going to the cinema. People can already buy fantastic home viewing equipment, but it still feels more special to share the experience of watching a new film with a theatre full of people. I don't think that technology will be able to replicate that cinema atmosphere. So here we have a mixture of present and future, and also using can as well to vary the grammar a little bit. Look at ideas and opinions. So having ideas and opinions is important for IELTS speaking part 3. Even if your grammar is excellent, you will not get a high score if you don't know what to say. For example, do you have an opinion about whether government should protect old buildings? So here are some possible ideas, opinions. So you could say historic buildings are part of a country's heritage. Old buildings are often considered to be works of art. So a good example of that in Hanoi is the Opera House on Chang Tien Street. They give character to cities and attract tourists. So when tourists visit Hanoi, they really like to visit the old quarter. We identify countries by architectural symbols like the pyramids in Egypt, Cairo is an example. Of course, London's famous one is the clock, Big Ben. Government should spend money on looking after historic buildings, and they need regular repairs and maintenance. So these kind of ideas, opinions are really important in part 3. As I often tell my students, part 3 is not a speaking test. Part 1 is a speaking test, part 2 is a presentation, and part 3 is a discussion where you need general knowledge to answer the questions really well. So you could say that part 3 is a general knowledge test in English. Now, this is another issue I find with some students. So by the end of speaking part 2, many IELTS candidates are exhausted and just want the exam to end. Consequently, they don't do as well as they could in part 3. So ever since I noticed this problem as an examiner, I told my students to make sure that they master the 3-step or sometimes 4-step method that you see before. I'll go through that on the next slide. So practice answering as many questions as you can using the answer, explain, example, plus alternative method. If you can get into the habit of following these steps, you'll finish the speaking test strongly and make a good final impression on the examiner. So let's have a look at an example of answer, explain, example. So my sample answers below all follow a 3-step structure. Answer, explain, example. I sometimes add a 4th step that you can see, I think it's on the next slide. But the first 3 steps are the most important. So practice answering all part 3 questions in this way. So how important is customer service for you? Answer, customer service is really important for me because I like to feel welcome and valued as a customer. So the next step is to explain why. If companies want us to use their products or services, I believe they should treat us well and therefore encourage us to return. And finally, the example. For example, I have a favorite cafe where I like to go, and the friendly staff are the main reason that I become a loyal customer. Let's have a look at another one, number 2. What can companies do to improve their customer service? So answer, I think managers need to train their employees to deliver great customer service. There are lots of things that staff members can do, such as ensuring that customers are greeted in the right way, or that their problems are handled quickly and they are asked for feedback. And the example, for example, the staff in my favorite cafe greet customers as soon as they come through the door, and they always check that we are happy before we leave. So another question, why do you think employees sometimes don't provide good customer service? So when employees' treatment to customers isn't good, I think it's usually because they are unhappy doing their jobs. This might be because they are treated badly by their managers or because they haven't been encouraged to take pride in their work. I remember in my first ever job, for example, I didn't like the work that I was given. And so I probably wasn't as thoughtful or as attentive as I should have been when I had to speak to customers. And the next slide, as we move on to, is the longer answer technique. So here's the technique that I recommend for giving long answers in part 3. So again, answer the question directly, explain why, give an example, and then explain the alternative or the opposite. And by adding in that, the last one, you are doing a comparison or a contrast, which means you are likely to use more complex vocabulary. So, do you think it's better to have clear aims for the future, or is it best to take each day as it comes? So answer, I think it's best to have a good idea of what you want to do with your life, especially in terms of studies and career. Having aims allows you to plan what you need to do today and tomorrow in order to achieve longer-term objectives. For example, if you want to become a doctor, you need to choose the right subjects at school, get the right exam results, and work hard at university. And now we have the opposite. Without a clear aim, it will be impossible to take the necessary steps towards a career in medicine or any other profession. Now, let's have a look at an example that's currently on the speaking test. So let's look. So note I try to answer in a natural and slightly informal way, but with some good topic vocabulary. So say this question's on the speaking test at present. Why do some people buy lots of things for their home? I think there could be a couple of different reasons for this. Some people like to surround themselves with beautiful objects and furnishings to brighten up their lives, while others buy lots of devices that are supposed to save time. In my own home, we have examples of both types of object. We have things like ornaments and pictures because they look nice, and we have useful gadgets like a small vacuum cleaner that we recently bought. And another question on the test, do you think it's very expensive to make a home look nice? No, definitely not. Basic furniture isn't expensive these days, especially now that we have shops like IKEA. I know plenty of people who have furnished and decorated their homes really nicely without spending too much money. Personally, I also like the minimalist look, some basic furniture, light colours and not too much clutter. And here's one more example. Why don't some people care about how their home looks? Maybe they just see their home as a base, somewhere to eat and sleep, rather than a reflection of their taste or personalities. And many people are just too busy with work and life outside the home to worry about furniture and decorations. A friend of mine, for example, doesn't seem to care about the way his house looks. But this is because he's almost never there. He travels for work and spends more time in hotel rooms than in his own house. Next one, example. So there's always an education topic on the speaking test. I can't remember when there wasn't an education topic. And a lot of the part 3 questions tend to repeat themselves over time. So these examples are band 9, but they give you some ideas how to answer this type of question. So what do you think makes a good lesson? I think a good lesson is one that is interesting and engaging. By engaging, I mean that students should feel involved in the lesson. They should feel that they are learning something new that is relevant to them. In my opinion, a lot depends on how the teacher delivers the content of the lesson in a way that students like. My favourite teacher at university used to involve students by making us teach some of the lessons ourselves. Do you think it's better to have a teacher or to teach yourself? Well, there's no substitute for a good teacher. I think you can teach yourself, but you can learn a lot more quickly with the guidance of a teacher. For example, when learning a language, you really need someone to correct your mistakes. You can get the grammar and vocabulary from books, but books can't tell you where you're going wrong. Do you think the traditional classroom will disappear in the future? I don't think it will disappear, but it might become less common. I think more people will study independently, using different technologies rather than sitting in a classroom. Maybe students will attend a lesson just once a week and spend the rest of the time following online courses or watching video lessons. So the last one, of course, is a imagination or speculative question. And some students find these type of questions really difficult. You need to remember the examiner's not expecting an answer from an expert. All the examiner wants you to do is attempt the question with 1 or 2 ideas. And if you do that, the examiner's quite happy. Again, technology questions are always on the test. This one is currently on the test until the end of December this year. So how much has technology improved how we communicate with each other? I'd say that technology has made communication faster and easier, but I don't think it has improved the quality of communication between people. I mean, it's so easy to send a text message or write a comment on social media these days. But maybe you could say that our conversations are quite superficial compared to the way people communicated in the past. For example, I remember writing long, detailed letters to friends and family members when I was younger, but I tend to just send quick messages from my phone these days. So in this answer, we're using different grammar tenses in the present and the past to do a comparison. Also, the first sentence, we're using comparatives, faster and easier. And don't make the mistake that a lot of students make, which could be, for example, I'd say that technology has made communication more convenient. A native English speaker would not really use an expression like that. It's something that I find with a lot of Vietnamese students using expressions like more convenient or more modern. And these kind of expressions are regarded as low-level vocabulary by the examiner. Use the correct comparatives, faster, easier, expressions like that. So we've got a couple more. Do you agree that there will be still many more major technological innovations to be made? So of course, people are working on all sorts of new technologies as we speak. And I'm sure that there will be technological advances and breakthroughs for as long as human societies exist. Personally, I'm fascinated to see what happens with self-driving cars and other types of artificial intelligence over the next few decades. And then the example, in fact, it looks like the UK and California in the USA will see this happen next year in 2021. So both the UK and California are likely to introduce self-driving cars next year. Next question, could you suggest some reasons why people are deciding to reduce their use of technology? So again, this kind of question is often on the test. Yes, I think the main reasons are that people feel overwhelmed or that their use of technology is becoming unhealthy. Some people have realized that all the devices and applications that they use are making their lives more complicated and stressful than necessary. Others might see themselves becoming addicted to checking their phones or wasting too much time on their social media pages. I try to limit my own use of my phone and laptop because I want to spend more of my time in the real world and on the internet. So, notice here, I've said straight away, they think the use of technology is becoming unhealthy. Now, don't make the mistake again what some students do. They'll start saying how looking at phones can give you bad eyesight and things like that. It's just sufficient to make the statements about being unhealthy and then move on, because that is not, if you start saying, well, it does this to you and that to you, it's not really adding extra information to your answer. You've already said that it's people who think they're becoming unhealthy. Keep focusing on answering the question directly. All right, let's have a look at another one in a bit more detail. So news questions are always on the test, and this is true at the moment. And again, what we're going to look at here, these questions have been on the test since May, and they will continue on the test until the end of this year, and probably in a different form be on the test next year as well. So let's have a look at these. So we have 5 questions here that, as I said, are on the test at present. Why is it important to watch the news? Do people in your country tend to watch local news or international news? Why do people like listening to negative news? Do you think some people find the news entertaining? And how has the way we get news changed in recent years? So let's have a look at some ideas to answer them. So what is the examiner looking for? So why is it important to? And why is it blank important? So here you need to evaluate something that is important and justify your answer. So why is it important to watch the news? Well, when you think about it, there are 2 types of news. We have local news, in other words, news about Vietnam or news about Hanoi. And we have international news. Another reason could be it's important to keep up to date about current affairs. You need to know what's going on both in your own country and in the world, because this is useful for an IELTS test. And of course, local news might affect you more. For example, changes to schools or roads. But if you're at university or working, then international news could well be just as important. So news about business, politics, climate change, globalization. And of course, at the moment, the COVID-19 situation affects most countries in the world. So let's have a look at this question. Why do people like listening to negative news? So some news programs and media seem to do this a lot. So it's all doom and gloom. It's really negative. So, you know, I read stories how we're all going to get sick with COVID-19. You know, a recent survey in the United Kingdom, people were saying, well, something like 7 to 8% of the population of the United Kingdom had actually been seriously ill with COVID-19. And actually the percentage is significantly lower than that. In fact, it's less than 1% of the population has got seriously sick with COVID-19. But negative news has given people the incorrect impression of the truth. Why do people like negative news? So many people like to complain and have a negative view of the world. I'm sure you know at least one person, or maybe you know who quite often is negative about things. Also, the media knows that negative news sells more newspapers or increases viewing numbers either on television or on social media. And I'm not being kind of anti-American, but I think that last one, really negative, is very much a format of the American news companies. CNN and Fox News are the 2 main ones. And I gave up watching them a long time ago because I just found them so negative about what's happening in the world. Do some people think the news is entertaining? Well, you could say news could be a conversation starter with friends. So comedy, shouldn't be comedy problems, I think that's a typing error. So comedians often make jokes about the news to entertain people. And looking for news about your favourite celebrity can be entertaining. How has the way we get news changed? Well, of course, you need to talk about the past. So in the past, news was obtained by newspapers, magazines, television, or maybe even the radio. So what has changed? Well, it's technology that's changed. That's the key thing. It's the improvement in technology. So then you can change to talking about the present. So you're now using two different grammar tenses. And today we have the internet. Things have become digital. So the internet these days is what we call a digital format. And online news is the way that many people get their news now. We can also get a lot of news through social media. A lot of young people in Vietnam like to do that. And today we can get more access to the news than in the past because we have a lot more choice. And people these days are also creating the news. And they do this through apps like Twitter or blogs. And Donald Trump is a good example of this. He's kind of a Twitter fanatic. And also pop stars and celebrities, a lot of them have their own Twitter accounts or their own blogs. And they use that to promote themselves and write news about what's happening in their lives. So all those are good examples to help you answer this question. So another topic that's on the test, and again, it's nearly always on the test, is about jobs. So let's just recap how to answer a part 3 question. So one simple system again is to give your opinion, explain why, and give an example or two. And when it comes to vocabulary, we have an acronym called HOTS, so Higher Order Thinking Skills. So to do this, you need to analyze, evaluate, justify, and speculate. So in part 3, the examiner begins by using the set question provided, then they can add or make up their own questions to probe or test you for more details and information. Therefore, it's a bit more difficult to prepare and memorize part 3 questions before the test. So you must focus on question types. And again, here we have some examples of questions that are currently on the speaking test related to jobs in the workplace. So what kind of jobs do young people like to do nowadays? Which is more important, earning money or having an interesting job? Why do people travel out of their hometowns to look for jobs? Do you think the jobs people will do in the future will change? So again, imagine, speculating about the future. How have attitude to jobs and the workplace changed in recent years? So again, we're comparing today with the past. And this is a new one. I've never seen this on the test before, but what are the psychological effects of work? And what motivates young people in the workplace? So let's have a look at some ideas to answer these. So question types, what have we got here? We have what kind of. So this type of question is often the first question in part 3, and it's always asked in the plural form. So you would be expected to give more than one example. And this is the question that's on the test at present. So what kind of jobs do young people like to do nowadays? And there's 3 examples you give. So computing is popular these days. IT jobs are becoming fashionable, or you could say they're becoming the trend. And it's the trend to be a businessman or woman. So a lot of young people in Hanoi do business studies at university because they hope in the future to have a little business of their own. So we have question types where there's differences. So the type of jobs people want to do might change because of how old people are, so generation differences. So older people tend to want job security, working for a big company or maybe the government. Some people want a career with a company so that they can move up the corporate ladder, so they can get more responsible jobs in the future. Otherwise, they have a kind of career path. And others want to become more independent, more control over their work with better holidays and maybe flexi-time working. So I'm not sure how common flexi-time working is in Vietnam, but in Europe, it's certainly a big thing. People have much more flexible working hours. So let's have a look at this question. Which is more important, earning money or having an interesting job? Well, you can answer this in different ways, actually. You could simply choose one answer, either earning money or an interesting job. And you could give a satisfactory answer doing that. However, if you want to give a more complex answer, you need to do comparisons and use the language of comparisons, as I mentioned before. So this will help you to develop your vocabulary, and if you do it reasonably correctly, it will improve your band score. So you could say earning money is really important, but having an interesting job is much more important. So you're comparing really important with much more important. And you could add that an interesting job can give you job satisfaction, and it will motivate you. So it will give you a more positive outlook on your work, on your career, on the company you work for. Let's go to the next question. So why do people travel out of their hometowns to look for jobs? So I think this is happening a lot more these days in Vietnam. Certainly in my country, England, it's happened for many, many years. So firstly, this question assumes that people do travel out of their hometowns, and you could actually agree or disagree with this question type. Remember, you don't always have to agree with a question. You can disagree and explain why this is your opinion. That's okay on part 3. And the examiner's quite happy for you to do that. But if you agree with the question, then you need to use the language of speculation or imagination. And here's some useful phrases that you might want to use. So it might be because, I suppose the reasons are, it could be that, well, maybe the reason is. So these opening expressions will definitely be noticed by the examiner as a good way of answering the question. And as I sometimes say to my students, or have to tell them, do not repeat the question, use an opening expression. So why do people do it? Why do people move from their hometown to the big city? Well, there might be better jobs in a big city. It could be a better lifestyle, better educational opportunities. People move to cities despite the fact there is overcrowding, and despite the fact house prices or rentals are higher. So capital cities like Hanoi or London are examples where you get certain job types that maybe you don't get in smaller cities or towns. For example, working in the media at companies like VTV is one example. Better educational opportunities. So a lot of young people in Vietnam do move from smaller towns and cities into Hanoi to go to university. Could be that the universities are better in Hanoi, or it could be that the universities offer subjects or majors more suitable to what the young person wants to do in the future. And notice that the last one, or the last two, I've got to the negative. So I'm doing a contrast again, despite the fact there is overcrowding or that house prices or rentals are higher. And again, I'm using the language of contrast. Let's have a look at another questions. Do you think the jobs people do is going to change in the future? So here we have to use the language of speculation. So again, opening phrases, they probably will, they possibly will, they could, or may, or might. And examples we could give to answer. So more jobs will be technologically focused. More people will need IT skills. Now, one thing definitely is many jobs of the future have not yet been invented. So if you'd have asked me this question 20 years ago, I definitely would have not have said anything about smartphone technology because it just hadn't been invented. More automation due to robots, so there's no doubt that robots are going to change many jobs in the future. And one effect of robots could be that routine jobs like in factories or in the service industry could disappear and people replaced with robots. I think that's starting to happen in some countries already. Another question, how have attitudes to jobs in the workplace changed in recent years? Well, you could start with saying in the past it was like this and now it's like this, to do a comparison. Attitudes to job securities are changing. People are changing jobs more frequently. So certainly in the past, people often work for the same company or organization. But these days, especially younger people, they seem to change jobs more frequently. So in the past, people expected a guaranteed salary. Now they want extras such as gym membership, free lunches, extra holidays, bonus payments as a reward for good work. Offices these days have a more open design. There are fewer managers in many companies now, and a lot more women work these days, and they're getting more responsible jobs. Certainly that's something that has been a huge change in my lifetime, the impact of women in the workplace. All right, last couple of questions to finish today's session. So, what are the psychological effects of work? I've never seen this question on the test before, but it is presently on the test. So you can look at both the positive and the negative. So the good part, work can be rewarding, challenging, and build self-confidence. And the negative, or the bad, or the downsides, so it can have a detrimental effect on mental health. People get stressed, or they have a poor work-life balance, so they're working long hours and they don't have a lot of time to spend, say, with their families, their children, or they don't have a lot of time to get away from the work atmosphere and maybe go and relax. And I think that is a really negative impact of today's working environment. And I see it in Vietnam, and I see it in my own country as well. And the final question, what motivates young people in the workplace? So you could start with an expression like, as far as I'm concerned, or for me personally, or a more less formal expression like, I reckon. A good motivation is a good working environment. Or it may be for many young people that they are motivated by what? It could be motivated by money, or motivated by the location of the place they work, or they don't want to travel a long, a long distance to work, or it could be they're motivated by what somebody has told them about this company and how good it is to work for. So to this, you can give some examples from your own or other people's perspectives. So we're coming to the end of today's workshop. I hope these have given you some ideas. As I said earlier, nearly all the questions I've looked at today are currently on the test and will continue on the test until the end of this year. As usual, if you want a copy of the slides, then ask GLN, they will provide them for you. Next week, we are going to start 8 lessons in IELTS writing. We'll do 4 lessons task 1 writing and 4 lessons for task 2 writing, and look at all the different question types you get in those 2 forms of writing. So as I say, I hope you've learned something today, and hope the rest of the day you find useful, and hopefully see you next week.
Okay, cảm ơn các bạn đã đồng hành cùng với thầy Terry và GLN trong suốt khóa học IELTS Free Course diễn ra trong 2 tháng. Vì hôm nay là buổi cuối cùng của khóa học này rồi, nên là mình xin giới thiệu về buổi học tiếp theo của tuần sau. Tuần sau là khóa writing cũng khung giờ này. Khóa học diễn ra trong 8 buổi và chuyên sâu vào writing task 1 và task 2. Nếu mà các bạn muốn đăng ký thì mình sẽ gửi link ở đây. Các bạn đăng ký để nhận thông tin về khóa học cũng như là nhận slide buổi học hôm nay. Các bạn có câu hỏi gì không ạ? link tham gia đăng ký khóa học writing từ mình nhé. Ok, nếu các bạn không có câu hỏi gì thì mình xin phép kết thúc lớp học IELTS Free Course online tại đây. Và nếu các bạn muốn các bạn muốn đăng ký, các bạn có thể inbox vào fanpage của GLN English Center để biết thêm thông tin về khóa học writing tuần sau nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn. Chào các bạn. Thank you, Terry.
Bye bye.
Bye. See you.
Bye bye.